Gungrave Gore is a third-person shooter that's based on the anime of the same name and sees you taking on the role of Grave as you tackle the ever-growing crisis of a drug being distributed by the Raven gang that turns its users into monsters. Your job is to wipe away any trace of the gang from the face of the earth, and this is where the gameplay takes front and center. For anyone familiar with the old PlayStation 2 releases, you'll feel right at home with the immense amount of weapons and abilities you're granted to get the job done. From dual-wielding pistols to machine guns, and even swinging your coffin around like a bat, you've got plenty of ways to deal with the hordes of enemies that come your way. What helps mix up the gameplay though is the combo system that sees the more hits you land opening up different types of attacks if there's no pauses in your approach. So what on the surface seems like another run-of-the-mill shooter soon turns into something with a surprising amount of depth. Of course, there's going to be times when the odds are stacked against you, and this is where Grave's defensive capabilities come into play. Very much like the originals, dodging and diving soon become just as important as your attacks, and this is especially apparent during the boss fights scattered throughout the campaign. Simply shooting and hoping for the best won't cut it here, with each of them possessing their own unique threats that demand a full understanding of all of the techniques at your disposal. Gore is fast, unrelenting, and most importantly fun to play, regardless of its basic nature. When it first released, it was marred by several technical issues such as its frame rate and various bugs, which no doubt contributed to its failure. But with all of these issues being ironed out with a patch, it's now a much better experience that is definitely worth playing. After their first RPG, RFL, developer Stegosoft Games would take everything they learned and apply it to a new adventure known as the Rise of the Third Power. It's a clear throwback to the 16-bit era, and anyone familiar with the likes of Chrono Trigger or the early Final Fantasy games will feel right at home. My favourite aspect is by far the setting and story that the game betrays, with it all taking place 20 years after a great war, where three kingdoms battled for power and unfortunately left the world in a mess. While it does begin with a somewhat cliche premise, it's not long before things start to become more complicated and interesting. The game's humour is fantastic and adds a lot of charm to the characters, but as betrayals surface and loyalties are put to the test, it does take a turn towards more tragic themes. And backing this up is the gameplay itself, that sees you controlling a party of 8 characters to utilise during battle, with each of them having their own strengths and weaknesses. It plays out with a turn-based system, so there's a generous amount of strategy to be had, especially when it comes to the combination of which characters you choose at the start of the fight. You've got your standard attacks as well as magic-based options, but it's the team-up abilities that offer your greatest chance of success and provide some of the game's more creative moments. As you would expect, you'll be leveling up over the course of the game, with plenty of new skills coming along with it that lends the adventure a true sense of progression as the tide slowly turns in your favour, with your band of heroes becoming nigh on unstoppable. With plenty of twists, turns and revelations along the way, Rise of the Third Power is one RPG that you do not want to miss, especially for fans of the 16-bit era. DNF Duel is a 2D-based fighting game that brings together several characters from the Dungeon and Fighter series into what is likely one of the most underrated brawlers on the PlayStation 4. Now the story revolves around the use of several gates which serve as a means to travel to different dimensions, and after they all but malfunction, the fate of many of the warriors throughout the land is held in the balance. To be fair, the story is pretty low-key and is clearly only there to provide a reason for these fighters to be meeting in the first place, but for as much as an afterthought it may seem, the same can't be said for the gameplay. This is where DNF Duel hits it out of the park and brings along with it several systems with plenty of options for newcomers and seasoned veterans alike. The best way to sum it up would be easy to learn but hard to master, with each of the characters having their own set of basic attacks as well as special moves and ultras that even the playing field. What differs with this one compared to others on the system though is the way in which battles play out. By combining the D-pad with the face buttons, you'll be able to lay down some hits with no restrictions, but when it comes to performing specials, each of them pull from a finite amount of MP that slowly restores itself over the fight. But if you go too hard and run out, you'll find yourself temporarily exhausted and unable to respond to incoming attacks. Because of this aspect, a lot of strategy is involved in each and every fight, which soon evolves into a juggling act of being patient and waiting for the right time to unload. Of course, one of the most impressive aspects of the game are the visuals, which look like an anime come to life. Each character is lovingly represented with with extremely detailed sprites, and thankfully the same can be said for the stages that offer a nice amount of diversity with plenty of locations to duke it out on. So if you're looking for a new fighting game to jump into and enjoy with your friends either at home together or across the waves online, DNF Duel is up to the task, and it's a game that shouldn't be missed. Natsuki Chronicles is a shoot-'em-up that comes from the same minds that brought us the likes of Bingo Force, but with a much more story-driven approach that's not often seen in games of this kind. Despite the game's somewhat bright and vibrant presentation, the narrative is a far more grim affair, with some surprisingly thoughtful moments throughout that help elevate it above similar games on the system. You take on the role of Natsuki, a member of the Rapid Deployment Force who's sent to apprehend several targets, but as the events unfold, you slowly begin to question your role and that of the organization you represent. As with most shooters, all of the action takes place from a side-scrolling view with a huge variety of enemies to avoid or shoot down as they appear from all sides at once. Naturally, you've got a wealth of ways to tackle the threat they pose, with a ton of weapons that range from standard lasers to more powerful options like rockets and beams that make short work of the enemy. This isn't the only obstacle you have to contend with, however, as the levels themselves offer up an extreme amount of challenge to make your way through in terms of their design. Some levels even go as far as to resemble mazes with a fixed screen scroll and a variety of rooms with timed doors that you must navigate. All of this adds up to an incredible shoot-'em-up with plenty of challenge as well as depth that's all wrapped up in a colourful art style that can call its own. With several modes to jump into that help prolong the game's runtime, it's also quite generous when it comes to replay value, making it a game that will take quite some time to see everything it has to offer. If you're like me and enjoy shoot-'em-ups and have all but exhausted the other options on the PlayStation 4, then Natsuki Chronicles is definitely something worth checking out. Broforce is quite easily one of the most hectic action platformers of all time, and it's clear to see that it doesn't feel guilty taking many aspects of other games like Metal Slug and calling them its own, right down to hostages needing to be saved, flags that have to be raised, explosive barrels, and an unrelenting sense of destruction. In fact, destruction is at the heart of the game, with you being able to blow up nearly every inch of any given level, which subverts nearly every rule of the genre and throws strategy straight out the window. Improvisation is your most valuable resource, with your reflexes serving as the means between victory or defeat. It can be quite unforgiving when first starting out, but once you get to grips with the way your character controls, you'll be darting around the screen and dodging certain death in no time. You get to choose from several characters who are all loosely based on American action heroes such as RoboCop and Rambo, and destroy each level as you leave an American flag waving in the wind. As you would expect, you've got a huge arsenal of weapons to get to grips with, from your standard machine gun to more exotic offerings like rocket launchers and special items. From katanas to whips and mythical pistols, there's plenty of extra ways to deal with the never-ending tide of enemies that pop up throughout each run. Quite easily, its most endearing quality though has to be multiplayer, as I feel this is where Broforce truly hits its stride and reveals an experience that's just as chaotic as it is fun. If you're on the lookout for something simple and enjoyable to jump into, Broforce is definitely something you should consider. Driving games were a dime a dozen on the PlayStation 4, with the likes of Gran Turismo and Drive Club providing some of the more memorable experiences on the console, but as always, games fall through the cracks and never manage to garner the recognition they deserve. And Wreckfest is one such example. If you're at all familiar with the likes of Destruction Derby and Burnout, you'll know exactly what to expect with Wreckfest. As its name suggests, it's not just all simply about driving and reaching the end of a race, but also running your opponents off the road and into walls being just as important. As with most racing games, everything is split up into a range of modes that offer different ways to play. The real meat and potatoes of the game lies in the career mode, that consists of 5 different championships made up of several events. From simple races to demolition derbies, there's plenty to sink your teeth into, and the gameplay more than stacks up, allowing you to control each car with confidence as you fight your way through to the front of the pack. For every event you win, you'll gain experience points that contribute to your overall driving level, as well as rewards rewards and credits that can be used to buy different parts or upgrade various aspects of your car. The best thing about this is that for every change you make, there's a noticeable difference once out on the track. And to top it off, there's various types of vehicles, from buses to trucks and cars, which all feel different to use and offer up several advantages when taking on each event you come across. It's not going to be an easy ride though, as the AI opponents are more than up for the challenge and aren't afraid to smash into you at any given moment and push you off the track. The difficulty scales throughout the duration of the campaign and constantly provokes you to take risks where you otherwise wouldn't, and ultimately you'll become a better driver because of it. For those of you who are fond of racing games but have all but exhausted the PlayStation 4's more popular offerings, then Wreckfest is for sure one game that is well worth snapping up. Gravity Circuit is an old-school side-scrolling platformer that celebrates the timeless genre by bringing together many elements of the games that inspired it and executing it perfectly. The game begins with the attack of an army of robots who are seemingly infected with a virus that sees them seeking to destroy all life. But this is where the role of the heroes of the planet known as Circuits come into play and stand as the last line of defense. As the player, you take up the fight as one of these robots and are tasked with traversing 12 stages that escalate in difficulty. And I know it may not sound like much, but the way in which these levels are designed more than makes up for the lack of quantity. The game cooks up the perfect blend of platforming and exploration, with every stage offering huge spaces to navigate, as well as a ton of challenge, mainly in the form of a boss that awaits you at the end of each. Thankfully, your little robot is more than up to the task, with you being able to perform several kicks and punches, as well as utilize a hook for making it across big gaps, and other special techniques that provide you with a fighting chance. Now, when you defeat some enemies, you will get power units called burst energy, which are necessary to carry out some of the attacks, which cause far more damage than your basic hits. But you'll have to be careful on how you use them, as simply burning them for the sake of it will really come back to bite you during the boss fights. After defeating each leader, a set of those attacks based on their abilities will become available for you to purchase, as well as several other aspects of your robot that can be upgraded in between stages. This allows you to shape your bot the way you see fit, and ultimately create a character that plays to your own strengths. When it comes down to it, it may not be the most original game out there, but it still offers up a hell of a lot of fun. So if you see it on the cheap, Gravity Circuit is well worth adding to your collection. When it comes to the PS4, players are literally spoiled for choice with the amount of first-person shooters available on the system. Of course, you've got your big names like Call of Duty and Battlefield, but there are far more enjoyable experiences for those willing to look hard enough, and one of these is Shadow Warrior 2. As a sequel, it's a huge improvement over the first game, and manages to build upon everything that it introduced in meaningful ways. This includes a bigger focus on its RPG elements, as well as the level of customization that allows you to grow your character as you want to. The way Shadow Warrior manages to stand out amongst other first-person shooters though is the huge mix of both melee-based weapons as well as traditional guns. For example, you'll find yourself slicing your way through enemies with a katana, only to quickly switch to your machine gun to pick off enemies at a distance. Because of this, the combat flows extremely well and is by far one of the best features of the game. Each environment you'll visit is designed extremely well, and you have many positions from which to attack and protect yourself from enemies who also know how to take advantage of the space around them effectively. At times it can become quite chaotic, but thanks to the way you're constantly drip-fed new weapons and abilities, you've always got the chance to stand your ground. And it's here where Shadow Warrior 2 truly comes into its own, by offering several ways to augment your weapons, such as increased damage, to shorter reload times and elemental effects. If you're tired of the run-of-the-mill first-person shooters on the PlayStation 4, then Shadow Warrior 2 offers up plenty of new ideas and ways to play that it more than deserves a spot in your library as well. The Deception series began its life way back in '96 on the original PlayStation, and since then several entries have released to mixed results. The Nightmare Princess is essentially a reworked version of the fourth game that aimed to iron out many of the issues that players had with the original, and on the whole it more than succeeds in doing so. For those who have never heard of it, Deception is a strategic RPG with an emphasis on action characterized by track-based combat. This plays out by attracting enemies into a series of skillfully arranged pitfalls to trigger chain reactions, maximizing your amount of damage while avoiding their attacks as well. Where the fun comes into it is the sheer amount of different traps available that range from the downright sadistic to comically absurd that give the game a really nice charm. Now the combat is largely split up into two different styles of play. One sees you running around the environment and evading enemies, whereas the other zooms out of the action and reveals a grid in which you're free to set your traps, be it blast bombs and bear traps or cannons and wall spikes. However, the humorous way that the Nightmare Princess mixes these body-destroying tools with seemingly harmless objects like banana skins, playground seesaws or carousel horses lessens the vicious edge of the game. All things considered, opinions about Deception 4 are certainly going to differ. Its engaging trap combinations will no doubt keep you engaged, but its somewhat dated appearance will likely turn some players off. For those willing to look past it though, the Nightmare Princess is an entertaining game that's ready to satisfy the strategically minded gamers among you. Astria Ascending is a turn-based JRPG that feels like a love letter to the games of old, with some of the biggest names in the industry behind its creation. The narrative all revolves around a group of demigods known as the Fated Eight. They act as the personal agents of the goddess who oversees the kingdom, and after some rather mysterious happenings, they are sent out to get to the bottom of the events that have set the wheels of destruction in motion. On the surface, it does seem rather cliche, but it's the writing that helps the somewhat generic setup really come into its own, with plenty of characters and scenarios that elevate it above many of the similar RPGs on the system. Of course, the story could be the best thing since sliced bread, but if the gameplay doesn't live up to the quality set by the narrative, it would all be for nothing. Thankfully, Astria is no slouch in this department as well, and is naturally made up of exploring the land as you visit various towns and locations that serve to flesh out the world and your place in it. But what helps mix it up is the inclusion of platforming elements that make exploring the world a bit more challenging, which is elevated even further thanks to the stellar battle system in place. The characters have at their disposal the traditional commands that allow you to attack, defend yourself, consume items, or cast special spells and abilities, but it's the focus mechanic that really helps it stand on its own, which is represented by a value in the top right of the screen. By skipping turns, you can slowly increase its amount and then once full, unleash it upon your party, which grants them a huge boost to their attacks. Overall, Astria Ascending is a masterful blend of various genres that all comes together to produce what is one of the most underrated RPGs in recent memory. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos which release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters which are up on the screen now for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.